Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. Today we're asking a question that resonates far beyond its immediate context. Is the political center truly cracking under pressure? Or are we simply witnessing a new, perhaps more fragmented, kind of alignment taking shape across the political spectrum? We've been poring over a fascinating piece from The Economist titled, "Is British Politics Broken? Its Center is Cracking?" alongside some crucial background material. It paints a vivid, almost unsettling picture of a political landscape in flux.
Yeah, it really does.
Suggesting some pretty dramatic shifts are underway. And while it focuses on Britain, this analysis offers critical insights into broader global trends, helping us understand the forces at play in modern political systems.
Indeed, the article's diagnosis of fragmentation in British politics is compelling, and it certainly highlights a moment of significant change. But, as we dig a little deeper into the data and other perspectives provided in our supplementary material, a more nuanced story begins to emerge. It's not just about things falling apart, it's fundamentally about how they're shifting and what that really means for effective governance in the long run. We're looking at a reshuffling, perhaps, not just a collapse.
Okay, let's start by looking at the immediate concerns then. The article opens with this stark warning about the political center springing a leak. What's the initial evidence it points to that makes that case for a weakening center?
Well, the signs are certainly there, and quite visible, actually. For instance, we saw Angela Rayner's resignation back on September 5th over a tax ethics finding, which then prompted a cabinet reshuffle just days later. And beyond those kinds of individual incidents, Prime Minister Starmer's personal ratings have been, quite poor, sitting at a YouGov net over 47 in August.
Wow, minus 47.
Yeah, and the government's overall vote share has drifted down into the low 20s. What's particularly striking there is that this isn't exclusively a British phenomenon. The article points to similar challenges for centrist governments in, say, France and Germany, suggesting a broader, perhaps even global pattern of, disaffection with the political middle ground.
And as the center struggles, the so-called extremes are certainly making themselves heard. We have Nigel Farage talking about Reform UK winning a majority by 2027, which is, a bold prediction.
Very bold.
Then Zach Polanski leading the Greens, even Jeremy Corbyn launching his Your Party. These movements seem to be actively pulling away from that traditional middle. Yet the article challenges the simpler explanations for this volatility, like voters being merely grouchy and fickle, or suddenly lurching towards nativism. So if it's not simply those things, what is the core driver, according to The Economist's analysis?
Well, what's fascinating here, and this comes from the British election study and allied research, is that post-Brexit, age and education have largely, trumped class as the best predictors of how people vote.
Interesting. So less about class now.
It's still a factor, but age and education seem much stronger now. This isn't about a grand nationwide ideological swing where everyone suddenly shifts from left to right or vice versa. Instead, what we're seeing is voters mostly shuffling within ideologically distinct blocks along this age and education cleavage. So, for example, Labour is losing voters to parties on its left, like the Greens perhaps, while the Conservatives are losing support to reform on their right. It's more of an internal redistribution within established ideological camps, rather than a mass conversion or a sudden dramatic lurch in public opinion across the board.
So it's less about a fundamental change of heart across the entire electorate and more about this internal repositioning within existing groups. Now, on that note, the article makes a really bold claim. If an election were held tomorrow, Reform UK could have a coin toss chance of a majority. This is a huge statement.
It's certainly a headline-grabbing projection, isn't it? And it raises an important question about how we interpret these kinds of models.
Yeah, how seriously should we take that?
Well, while some electoral calculus models do spit out scenarios where Reform could win around 368 seats with roughly a 30% vote share.
Which would give them a majority.
Exactly, giving them something like an 86% chance of being the largest party in that specific model run. But, and this is crucial, these rest on very fragile assumptions.
Okay, like what?
We're talking about things like new party geography, how efficiently a new party's votes are spread out to actually win seats, not just pile up in places they can't win.
Right, the distribution matters.
Hugely. Also, the unwinding of tactical voting patterns, which we saw play a big role before, and potentially significant turnout shifts among different groups. And look, YouGov polling finds only 24% of people actually think Reform would run the country well.
So not a lot of confidence there.
Not really. So while the model can produce that outcome, we should treat that coin toss to a majority as very model contingent. It depends heavily on specific, often uncertain inputs. It's not a settled baseline prediction of what will actually happen. A possible scenario, maybe, but far from a certainty.
That's a really crucial caveat for understanding the political landscape, isn't it? It means we shouldn't confuse a model's output with, well, an inevitable future. So if it's less about a sudden nationwide lurch and more about this internal shifting, what about the economist's suggestion that only governing from the hard center saves the center? Is that prescription as straightforward as it sounds? Or are there, complications?
Not entirely straightforward, I'd argue. Look, the article is absolutely right that chasing the fringes can be self-defeating. The conservative EU gambit is a perfect, almost canonical example of that.
Right, trying to appease one group led to Brexit.
Exactly. Where trying to appease a vocal minority led to a much larger unintended consequence. However, its prescription for governing from the hard center, well, it kind of underplays some significant execution constraints that our background material really highlights.
Like what sort of constraints?
Well, consider the legitimacy math. Labor's 2024 landslide, which the article mentions, actually rested on only about 35% of the vote share.
Which isn't a huge mandate, percentage-wise?
No, it's relatively weak, especially in an era of such fragmentation. And with their post-election polling showing a bit of a freefall in support, it naturally reduces risk tolerance within the parliamentary Labour Party itself. People get nervous.
Understandable.
And this political reality limits the very reforms the article urges. It creates a kind of paradox where the desire for stability might actually hinder the bold action needed to govern from that hard center.
So, if the political will is limited by this weak mandate, what about the cold, hard economic realities? Is that just another constraint or perhaps an even bigger, inescapable force that this article might be downplaying a bit?
That's an excellent point. The article sort of gestures at it, but the constraint of market credibility, and importantly, the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, that credibility constraint is probably stronger than the article lets on.
Right.
Flirting with sidelining the OBR, as some on Labor's left are now suggesting, well, that would collide directly with the gilt market memories of 2022.
Yes, the mini-budget fallout.
Exactly. A stark reminder of how quickly markets reacted to unfunded proposals then, leading to significant economic turmoil. So the politics of growth, however appealing, must still fit within these established fiscal institutions. Or you risk facing severe economic consequences, which no government, especially one with a shaky mandate, wants to contend with. The ghost of 2022 looms large.
Okay, so beyond the article's own conclusions, our accompanying background material offers some fascinating alternative perspectives. What does it tell us the original piece might be underplaying or even missing entirely in its analysis?
Well, a key omission, I think, is the full significance of Angela Rayner's exit. It's not just scandal noise. It fundamentally shifts the coalition management within the Labour Party.
How so?
With the deputy leadership now open, and these left-of-Labour parties, like the Greens under Zach Polanski and Corbyn Sultana launching Your Party mobilizing, well, the government's internal left pressure is definitely rising.
So pressure from within their own broad church.
Precisely. It's like trying to steer a ship very carefully through a narrow channel, but some of your own crew are debating the best course right there on the bridge, maybe even pulling at the rudder a bit, while you're also navigating these strong external currents. That internal pressure makes maintaining a firm, hard center line exceptionally tricky.
Especially when they're already trying to hold a pro-growth line on things like planning, welfare, and migration, which can be contentious.
Exactly. The timing is difficult.
So the pressure isn't just external from other parties, but from within their own ranks, potentially pushing them away from that hard center approach.
What about the actual mechanics of elections themselves? We often hear about projections, but how much can they truly tell us about what will happen on polling day?
Yeah, this raises an important point because we often treat projections almost like destiny, don't we? But electoral mechanics, especially in a first-past-the-post system like the UK's, could flip things very late in the game.
How does that work? Well, first past the post is notoriously unforgiving winner-takes-all in each constituency. But it's also highly sensitive to late tactical cues from voters.
Tactical voting, right?
Yes. The 2024 election showed how national vote shares can often mispredict the final seat count. The relationship between votes and actual parliamentary representation can be quite distorted. A late squeeze, maybe Labor or Lib Dem voters coordinating, or specific anti-reform coordination in certain seats that could dramatically cut reform seat haul, even if they manage to top the popular vote nationally or in some regions.
So the national picture might not reflect the seat-by-seat reality.
Exactly. That's why treating any single projection as destiny is risky. The fluidity of the electoral system means outcomes are often uncertain until the very last moment. For you, the listener, it's a powerful reminder that polling numbers are just snapshots, not crystal balls.
That's a critical point to consider. So given all these complexities and challenges, what does this all mean for a sharper playbook? If the goal is to save the center by governing from it, what moves have the best evidence and the fewest, well, boomerangs, as the background material puts it, to actually achieve that stability and effectiveness?
That's precisely where our background material provides a real look into actionable strategy. It offers a compelling alternative to just, don't panic for those trying to govern from the center. It suggests a sort of four-pronged approach rooted in evidence.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, it's about delivering visible growth where voters actually live. The critical insight here is that when the political center feels like it's cracking, it's often because people feel a disconnect between grand national narratives and their own lived experience.
Makes sense. People care about their local area.
Right. Visible local growth isn't just a policy. It's a direct counter to that feeling of irrelevance, maybe even enemy. It helps rebuild trust at the most tangible level in a way national GDP figures rarely can. This means things like fast-tracking planning reform, which has apparently already been briefed to Steve Reed with his "build, baby, build" mantra.
Okay.
It involves strict milestones, like setting clear permit-to-ground-break timelines and maybe quarter-level infrastructure deals that create tangible local benefits people can actually see and feel. The politics of growth soften when residents see the upgrades. It makes it less abstract, more real.
Focusing on tangible local impact certainly seems pragmatic. But isn't there a risk that by prioritizing local benefits, a government might lose sight of broader national challenges or even alienate regions that don't see immediate visible upgrades?
That's a crucial observation, and it definitely highlights the balancing act required. It's not about exclusively local, but about ensuring national policy has clear, demonstrable local manifestations. Which leads to the second point, actually.
Go on.
Protect fiscal credibility. Don't just talk about it. Bind big-ticket moves to OBR scoring and clear phase-in rules. Prioritize things like NHS productivity, skills, and housing over broad, unfunded giveaways. The background material notes that, for instance, chasing reform on immigration with purely symbolic crackdowns hasn't actually arrested Labor's slide in the polls.
Interesting. So symbols aren't enough.
Apparently not. It indicates that symbolic gestures aren't enough when core credibility is perceived to be at stake. Voters seem to be looking for competence, not just a knee-jerk response to a particular media narrative.
And what about that consistent challenge from the fringes? How do you tackle that without simply trying to appease them, which, as you noted earlier, can be self-defeating?
That's where the third point comes in, competing within existing voter blocs, rather than simply trying to appease fringe movements with their specific, often unsustainable demands. Appeasing can be that boomerang. The background material mentions it often alienates your core support without truly capturing the fringe anyway.
So how do you compete within the blocks?
Well, for the left flank, for example, it means expanding things like childcare and renters' protections, issues the Greens and Lib Dems often champion. But crucially, funding them inside the existing fiscal envelope. It's about showing competence and owning key progressive issues without being fiscally irresponsible or dragged off course.
Right.
And for the right flank, it means emphasizing legal migration reforms tied clearly to skills and enforcement, not just focusing on headline caps, which can seem arbitrary. YouGov finds reform is agenda setting on immigration, sure, but not yet trusted to govern. That creates an opportunity to address voter concerns with competent, practical solutions rather than just rhetoric.
That's a clever way to address the underlying concerns without being drawn into the same, potentially self-defeating arguments.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally, what was the fourth point?
Finally, own the voting system conversation pragmatically. Look, don't promise proportional representation outright. That's a massive political commitment, huge implications for the party's own future, requires a constitutional overhaul.
A huge undertaking.
Huge. Instead, acknowledge first-past-the-post's distortions, which are undeniable, and back serious transparency measures around boundaries and tactical voting. Things like clearer local polling rules. That helps blunt those rigged system narratives without detonating your own seat map or making promises you might not be able to keep. It's about leaning into transparency and fairness rather than system revolution.
Pragmatic.
If we connect all this to the bigger picture, the Economist article absolutely nails the diagnosis that this block fragmentation under first past the post is producing volatile, often perverse seat outcomes. That part seems spot on. However, it probably leans a bit too hard into a reformist juggernaut narrative that rests on this rather brittle modeling we discussed.
Right, the model contingency.
Exactly. The center isn't saved by rhetoric alone. It seems it's saved by concrete delivery and maintaining institutional credibility while effectively competing inside these new age and education blocks. Ultimately, a large parliamentary majority buys you time, sure, but it doesn't grant immunity from these deeper structural shifts in the electorate. For you, the listener, understanding this means recognizing that political stability is maybe less about grand ideological battles these days and more about the intricate dance of policy, perception, and those institutional constraints.
It certainly leaves us with thought that political stability in Britain might hinge less on dramatic shifts or chasing extremes and more on, well, pragmatic, evidence-based governing that directly addresses voter concerns and respects those institutional realities. So as we wrap up this discussion, maybe consider this. If age and education are now trumping class and predicting votes, and those old ideological lines are fading, what does that mean for the very definition of a political center in a fragmented world? Is it still a fixed point, or is it becoming more like a constantly shifting equilibrium that we're all just trying to find? We'd love to hear your thoughts on what stands out to you from this breakdown. Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.